Hello, hello. I'm glad to see you guys. I got nothing but good news today. We're going to talk about third parties. I'll try to make this quick. Remember to use headphones. If you don't have headphones, then you'll need to do this at home. And here we go. So, a third party, we talked about this yesterday. Um, Either single issue based on a candidate or an offshoot of a party. So remember, a third party is just any party that's not a Democrat or Republican today. Here are some examples of single issue parties. There's the Right to Life Party, which you may have guessed that's an anti abortion party. The Green Party, we've talked about over and over again, being a environmental party. And then the Libertarians, we talked in pretty good detail a few days ago about what makes a libertarian. And they believe the government should not be involved, should be involved as little as possible when it comes to when it comes to everything. So not just fiscal, not just they're fiscally conservative because they think the government should be hands off, and they are also socially liberal, and they think the government should be hands off your money and your life. And they call themselves the ultimate freedom fighters. The um, uh, the libertarians. Here's an example of a ticket that from a long time ago, but what you can see here is this is in 2012 when Obama ran against Mitt Romney. And here you've got the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, um, the OBJ Party, or CBJ, I can't remember that. Gary Johnson was a libertarian. Um, Maybe that is, no, that's something different. You see the Green Party, Reform Party, Socialist Party, American Independent Party, and so on. So you'll see that's what a ticket for president looks like. Democrat and Republican on top, and then all the fun ones below. Okay, so it's hard to be a, a third party candidate today, and here are some reasons why. Um, and I will say that this slide here is going to be a little complicated, so make sure that you get it before you move on. And it's a good thing that you can just pause and go back. So the first thing is when it comes to um, elections in the U.S., they are winner take all elections. And so what that means is we don't have a vote. We vote for one, and then the person with the largest amount wins. This this is democracy, um, but it doesn't allow for third parties um, to get much footing. Um, so um, for example, we could have proportional representation. And in England, the way that works is when everybody goes to vote, um, they they vote for their representatives. But at the end of the day, they count. You're actually voting for your party, and then you let your party decide who's going to be the people that hold those offices. And so in the U.S., if somebody gets if a party gets 15% of the votes, they're probably not going to have very much representation in the government. And if you're one candidate and you get 15% of the votes, you get nothing, right? But in Europe, if you get 15% of the votes, then 15% of the seats are going to go to your party. And the thing to realize is if that happens, minor parties can get more and more power and more control and more influence. So, yeah. We also have the winner take all electoral college system. So up here, we're talking about winner take all in all of the elections. Down here, we're talking about in the presidential elections. And so the only two exemptions for this um, are Maine and Nebraska, and neither of them have very many electoral college members. There's a fun typo. Um, so, um, an example of a winner take all electoral college election is that in the 90s, this guy Ross Perot, who you maybe haven't heard of, he got one out of every five votes that were cast that year, but he got zero electoral college votes. Now, there's an argument that had we been proportional in our electoral college, that still Ross Perot wouldn't have won in the 90s. But what would have happened is his party could have grown, and maybe the next time got more votes, and the next time, and the next thing you know, bada bing, bada boom. Okay, and so. And for the most part, too, the debates usually aren't opened up to minor party candidates, so they don't get to get on TV. And the way the system kind of makes it so they don't get on TV is they say there should be a minimum amount of votes that you've gotten, or sorry, not a minimum amount of votes, but a minimum amount of polling numbers. So in the polls, where you have to have at least 10%, or maybe 20%, or 30%, depending on the time and the debate. Um, so they don't get a lot of coverage. So so there's two things that minor parties do. And remember, you can call minor parties, you can call them third parties. Either way is fine. But the stronger a minor party is, the more likely one of the two major parties might take their ideas and run with them. And an example would be the Green Party having an influence on the Democratic Party today. And the other thing is the spoiler effect. And this is more important. This comes up more often. And so we can go back to this guy, Ralph Nader, who I've talked about before. Basically, he was the Green Party candidate in 2000. And if you know anything about the 2000 election, you know that it came down to like a few hundred votes. And had Al Gore, the Democrat, been a if Ralph Nader didn't run and his votes went to Al Gore, the Democrat, then Al Gore would have won easily. And so what happened was Ralph Nader, who would probably preferred President Gore to President Bush just because of the politics, ended up swaying the race, and George W. Bush is going to win and be president for the next 8 years. So this was an election that political scientists say was spoiled. Okay, so if we had more parties, you know, and our parties had more power, um, there would be a lot more representation here. More people's voice would be heard, and just imagine, what if there was a religious party? What if there was a Southern Christian party? What if there was an African American party? What if there's a party for labor unions? And that makes a difference. And in other countries, we see that, and we see um, a lot more um, diversity in other countries. So our party system is pretty stinky, and here's some reasons why. Um, the first reason is the actual party doesn't have control over the candidates. A lot of candidates get elected on their own, um, and the party can't punish them like they can back in Europe. So if let's say a Democrat, let's say Joe Biden gets elected and he starts doing things that the Democratic Party disagrees with. Um, in the US, there's nothing the Democratic Party can do. However, in England, for example, if he starts doing these un-American things, um, the party can call for a recall election, and they can vote as a party on whether or not that that person needs to be in that office. And um, so I have a question. If a candidate has to decide between towing the party line or protecting themselves, what do you think that they're going to choose? And an example I have of this is the blue dog Democrats. So you need to know about two different dog Democrat things. The first one is a yellow dog Democrat, and the reason that is a true loyal Democrat. And what the reason it's called a yellow dog Democrat is because you there's a saying that in the South, I'd vote for a yellow dog as long as it was a Democrat. But what happens is over time, there are Democrats who see that they're getting taxed and taxed and taxed. And so they start calling themselves blue dog Democrats. So they're those same loyal yellow dogs, but those yellow dogs have been squeezed so hard they've turned blue. Um, and these are Democrats that still believe in all of the Democratic principles and the Democratic Party, but they think that a problem with the Democratic Party is that they spend too much money, they tax too much, and so something to think about. Um, so, as far as the scope of government, remember the scope of government is how much the government does. And you have to think about how the it's hard for a party to push spending because people know that they're going to try to tax um, in to spend to get the money to spend, and so you've got healthcare. Um, Universal health care. Harry Truman tried to push it through, as did Bill Clinton, as did Obama, and we still do not have national health care. So there's there's this idea that um, it's hard to get everybody to vote. Hard to get everyone to vote. Cut a lot of spending. To vote to cut a lot of spending. Yeah, so it's hard to talk people into cutting spending because cutting spending is going to mean that the citizens are going to get less benefits, and why would you vote for less benefits? And so what happens is the status quo. Remember, status quo means the way things are. The status quo is going to stay for the most part. And when one side and the other side can't agree on anything, then the same people that were in charge before are going to stay in charge again. And that's kind of parties in a nutshell. Okay, let's talk about in general primary elections and general elections. I've talked about this a few times now, and make sure you have this T chart in your notes. That primaries are the elections that happen first. They're ran by the parties. Remember that a primary election isn't an election. It's not an official election. And this is where the parties choose their candidates. The general election is going to be in November. Now, for the primaries start in January, and they run through, I think, even into June. In Kentucky, it's May. That's why I put May there. The general election is the official election ran by the government, and it's for the general population to pick the who's going to take the office. So primaries first, general is second. Okay. Let me see how I'm doing on time. Okay. A lot more stuff that we've talked about coming up here in just a few minutes. So it's really important to realize that our election process is one of the longest processes in the country, or sorry, in the world. And it's a big, long process to get elected. It's physically and emotionally taxing. Um, Other countries, the average time for a campaign is 2 months. But in the US, we've seen it go as much as 18 months. An example of that would be Hillary Clinton when as soon as she was the Secretary of State for Barack Obama between 2008 and 2010. And let's go back earlier than that. Hillary Clinton was the first lady, right? She was married to Bill Clinton. And so what she did was she's going to run for Senate after Bill Clinton leaves office in 2000. And so um, the first thing she does is she buys a house in New York City because she wants to be a senator from New York. And she starts taking off running for Senate right then and there. Um, Even though she has 2 years before the actual election. Another example of that would be um, um, in 2016, again with Hillary Clinton. It goes like this: that Hillary Clinton is going to be hired. She loses to Barack Obama in 2008, and then she's going to get hired as the Secretary of State. And she's going to be the Secretary of State all the way through his first term, so 2008 to 2012. And then in his second term, 2012 to 2016, she resigns in 2014. Okay, so think about that. It's 2014. She's not the Secretary of State anymore. Everybody knows she's going to run for office, run for the presidency. And so basically, by her saying, I'm not the Secretary of State anymore, she's saying, I'm going to start campaigning um, as, as the person that's going to replace Barack Obama. That's kind of how that starts. And so that's the biggest example of a president taking 2 years um, in the primaries. Yeah. All right. So we talked about the National Party Convention, when that takes place. That takes place in July or the summer before a presidential election. Um, and this is where they figure out who's going to be their candidate. Before the modern time period, every state vote was cast by just one individual person, one or two party bosses. But today it's a lot more democratic. And what that means is There are Kentucky is going to have um, 6 delegates. No, sorry, 8 delegates. They're going to have 8 Democratic delegates and 8 Republican delegates. And by doing that, the way you get those delegates is you have to win the popular vote in the state in Kentucky. So the majority of Republicans um, are gonna appoint their Republican candidate, and they're going to get all 8 electoral college votes. And then the same thing's going to happen for the Democrats, but it's going to be based on a popular vote. So, and this happened because in 1968, Vietnam was going really. Um, uh, Vietnam was at the height of the escalations, and in there were riots and at the Democratic National Convention because in 1968 it was Hubert Humphrey. They just the Democrats picked Hubert Humphrey to be their candidate, and everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people said that is not really. He's more of a middle of the road kind of person, and the people who are the majority of Democrats wanted something more radically done. So that's 1968. That's when the primary process changes. It goes from just party bosses picking somebody to every state having a vote, and then whoever gets the most votes in a state gets those delegates. And this is exactly the same for the Electoral College. It's just in the primaries, they're called delegates, and in the general election, they're called electors. But it's the same process. Okay, so you got to know the difference between a primary and a caucus. And there's a few different definitions for caucus that you're going to see through this unit. The first one is just another way to hold a primary. So in a primary election, it's really simple. You go in and vote, and the nominee is gonna whoever gets the most votes is gonna get those delegates. In a caucus, it's important to know that it's a type of primary election too, but what it is, it's weird, and so and it can be anything. The biggest example of it is everybody goes to a church on a weeknight, and people stand up and give speeches about candidates, and then people kind of organize themselves with candidates. And this can be something like raise your hand if you like Bernie Sanders, um, or it can be something I've heard of people putting ping pong balls in the buckets and then them counting the ping pong balls. So it's an old school way to do a primary is an electoral caucus. Okay. All right. Okay, front loading we've talked about. Front loading is where there are more and more earlier primaries. And so the first primary is New Hampshire. And this is when primaries are held is determined by the party. It's going to be the state and national party. And so the reason I typed that in there is because the um, the state is going to decide. Um, the state is going to decide that um, they want more. They want their election, their primary, to be earlier and earlier because that means they can. Um, they'll have more influence on the candidates, and they'll get more news coverage, and it'll be getting their issues out there. So, but front loading is this idea to make them earlier and earlier. And so let's move on and talk about the first caucus. First caucus is in Iowa, and you'll keep hearing Iowa and New Hampshire, Iowa and New Hampshire. That's something that you have to know is that these are the states that are front loaded the most. Okay. And here's a quote from the text I thought was interesting. The winner of the Iowa caucus doesn't always go on to win the nomination, but results from Iowa usually serve to winnow down the number of viable candidates for primaries to come. So there have been a number of times when there have been people that have won the Iowa or the New Hampshire delegates and still not won. Even became the candidate, let alone lose in the general election. So that's the first primaries. It's all about front loading. You got to know that word front loading. Okay. Now another thing with primaries is what we talked about earlier, um, which is the fact that primaries can start as early as 2 years before a general election, or sorry, before a primary. So the primary, let's say in Kentucky, is in May. You can have somebody running for that election 2 years before May, which is nuts. And and so these invisible primaries, they don't count for anything, but um, you can definitely do a lot of damage and get kicked and get voted out early. Two really good examples of this was uh, a Mitt Romney was being interviewed way before the primary started, um, but he was running, and the um, the the news reporter asked him why Mitt Romney's dad did a specific thing. I can't remember what it was, and Mitt Romney basically said, "Well, he didn't really mean that. Maybe he was brainwashed." And so now you have everybody freaking out that Mitt Romney is going around saying that his dad was brainwashed. If he can get brainwashed, then anybody can get. Then maybe Romney himself can get brainwashed. And then another guy, Rick Perry, he has this really interesting statement that he has where he said, I promise you, when I go to office, the first day, I'm going to get rid of three things. I'm going to get rid of the Department of Education. I'm going to get rid of the Department of Health and Human Services. And um, uh, and the reporter said, "Are you saying you don't know the third thing you get rid of?" And he's sitting there and he's like, "Oops." And that, oops, those four letters basically showed that Rick Perry didn't have what it takes to get the Republican nomination. Here's a fun little cartoon of Iowa and New Hampshire. And you can see they're both little guys, but they're fat. And they're eating all of the presidential primary candidates, and they're happy and they're content and they're taken care of, Iowa and New Hampshire. And then a much bigger group that needs more influence, they're only getting the crumbs of the cereal. And so I think you can kind of see what's going on there. Um, So, some problems with the primary election. First of all, this word disproportionate, that means it's not the right portion. Early states get more attention. Um, if you are if you're think about this. Let's say you get elected as a House member in 2022, and you want to run for president in 2024. All right. The way Kentucky, no, the way the United States works is you're going to get elected to be the House member, and then for the next 2 years, you're going to be expected to be running for president. Well, that's cool, except you have to be a representative. And so we see a lot of that a lot. Um, Money is going to be the thing that rules in primaries, how much money you can raise. And another thing is that primaries and caucuses are not very well participated in. Um, and Because of that, you can see that there are times when um, um, the media is going to give way too much power, is going to have too much power, sorry, um, and they're going to be able to make or break a candidate. For example, that maybe Rick Perry would have been a fine president, but one little statement blows up, and everybody hears it, and he's done for. And so the media can definitely make or break candidates. Um, so as far as the primaries, um, things you need to know is it's the same party against itself. It's like a scrimmage, okay? And then whoever wins the scrimmage is going to go to the real game, which is the general election. Because it's party against party, it means that people are going to act more extreme. So your Democrats are going to be further left, and your Republicans are going to be further right, because they're only really focusing on the they're only really focusing on the people in their party. And now they have to be careful; they can't be too crazy left or crazy right, because what happens there is that uh, if they do something that's too crazy, then the other party's going to notice, and then that can hurt them in the general election. Um, but what you'll see is people during the primaries moving out to the left and right, and then when they get elected to come to the general election, they come closer back to the middle. And they need to do that because if you're going to be president, you're going to have some people from the other party vote for you. And so, yeah. So here is a map of the of how important Iowa and New Hampshire are. So these are the primaries, and the size of your state here is reflected based on the amount of importance that your primary has. And you can see California and Texas, not very much, but New Hampshire is huge, as is Iowa. Okay. And then the last thing, we talked about this, but I just want to make sure that you know that this is every July before a presidential election. Three things happen. Now, we've already talked about the platform, where they're going to stand on, the issues they're going to stand on. So we've already talked about that. The other two things that happen at the primary, first is they're going to formally nominate the presidential candidate who's going to run in November. And probably the big surprise that always comes out of the national convention is who's going to be the vice president. And so the vice president is nowadays always named. The vice presidential candidate is always named at the national conventions. And we talked about the rest of this. Just make sure that you know that. Okay, thank you guys for paying close attention today, and we will get some more information to you all very soon. And have a great weekend.